Hi, I'm Dick Dadamo. I'd like to have you join a conversation I'm going to have with Phil Harding on a very interesting topic. Phil was actually the CEO and chairman of the board of a public multi-$100 million company. At one point, his majority of sales were one customer, and that customer came by with a black cloud over Phil's head. Phil will tell us how he not only survived, but he also started to grow again. Phil, do you want to give us a little background on the history of your employment and where you are today?
Okay, a short history. I started my career at the Bell Telephone Laboratories in research, and it merged into development. Actually, when I left the Bell Telephone Laboratories, I was in charge of a group working on the first all-electronic computerized telephone switching system called ESS, Electronic Switching System, first installed in New York City in a government district. After leaving the Bell Laboratories, I decided to join more industrial type companies rather than a large kind of company like the laboratories. I then went to a company called Electronic Memories and Magnetics, where I started as a research manager and finally became the general manager. After a while, I left them and joined TRW Fujitsu Corporation, working on point of sale systems and bank cards. And then I started a number of companies where I then joined MFlex, the company I finally retired from.
How did you get involved with Mflex? Because that was most of your successful career, I hope.
Yeah. I joined the MFlex after I actually four different positions, either a general manager, president, or CEO of numerous startup companies. And I was also chairman of the board of another startup company. Uh, while I was one of the startup companies, one of the investors asked me if I could help them in a company they invested in that was in trouble. The president of that company wasn't doing well, and they asked me to help them find a new president or CEO. So I started working in that company to help them locate a new president, and I guess I was doing good enough because I managed it while looking for the president. They asked me to stay. That's how I got into MFlex.
Phil, how long did it take you to start that time to become a full blown public company in an international market? And what was the level of business when you left?
Wow, let's see. We went public in 2005. I started that company in 1987, so it's 13, 20, 18 years.
Okay, what was the level when you left
Uh,
of sales?
Over 800 million. So our run rate was actually bumping $1 billion.
Very good. Now, when this opportunity, which is a terrible way to describe a black cloud, when this came along, were you prepared in any form? Were you anticipating it?
The
The
black
black
cloud,
cloud, yeah.
oh yeah, I assume you mean the black cloud when we lost a large, not lost, but a large customer lost a lot of their business and had to decrease the orders with us. Is that what you're talking about?
You were being a public company then.
Yes.
So tell us, how did you first let your staff know it, your board of directors know it, and did your shareholders have to be told?
Yeah. Well, the company, I guess I can mention the name of the company. Motorola was the largest company at the time. We were doing a lot of business with them because of prior effort in developing the customer. Uh, they started losing share of the market. They were in the marketplace of smartphones, and it started getting be very competitive. So it lost some business. We actually anticipated this because of a strategy I use in running my companies. There are two basic strategies. One is called contingency planning. That is, evaluate what you would do in the case of a problem arising or a good thing happening, like if you get more orders than you think you can handle or you get downsizing do your customer decreasing orders? What do you do? So we had continually studied that situation with the customer. So we actually had paper studies of what would happen when they decreased their business. So in a sense, we planned for it. The second thing is that one of the risk-taking plans for the company is always to look for growth with other opportunities. And one way we do that is to find another customer like the one we had at the time. By doing a thing that's a very simple task, by saying, first come, first serve. Instead of catering to the largest customer, we treated every customer alike, and as orders came in, the ones that were first were handled first. In this way, we didn't really give preference to our largest customer. They got proportionally large share because they were the largest customer, but we didn't accelerate or do anything out of the ordinary to give them preference. Those two things, I think, were what happened. We were able to, by doing that, have our staff and board knowledgeable of what would happen if we had to decrease the orders with our largest customer, because we had a plan for it.
Can you give us an idea, if you may, how deep the cut was in revenue and what percentage of your total sales it was ultimately?
Well, I can really talk about, I mean, there was a lot of cuts as we went along, but the first quarter was interesting. We had our record-breaking quarter in the December quarter, mostly because of this customer. And the next quarter was supposed to be a pretty large volume with the customer. We had a plan of what we would do if they decreased by about 25%. And actually, what came about in the next quarter, they decreased 30%. We had a written plan of what we would do. And in fact, we carried that plan out. They partially recovered thereafter, so things didn't get so bad during the remainder of the year. But that idea of what we had to do if they were going to decrease business was in place, and thereafter they started decreasing a little bit of business. So we were able to ride through the wave of the downsides.
But I assume that ultimately they decreased so much, you had to somehow bring more business in equal to what they were originally.
Yeah, that's true. They were 75% roughly of our business around that time that I mentioned, that quarter. And they eventually decreased to the neighborhood of, the time I left, in the neighborhood of 25%. There's two ways you can go from 75 to 25%. One way is a good way, the other way is a bad way. The good way is to grow some other businesses that make their share not as significant. We were able to achieve that by using another customer that we had a plan for building up that took their place. And that happened over a period of a year and a half.
What are some of the specific things you had to do to the organization? And you did have a large group overseas, right?
Yes.
So what specifically must have had to do some real tough decisions with the people and the organization? Could you give us a couple ideas?
Well, this is actually a very complex topic. The problem of how you grow an organization or how you downsize an organization is a very difficult strategic planning, risk-taking ordeal. For example, you can, if you don't have the opportunity to grow and a large customer comes to you, you can't accept the orders or you can't deliver. So you have to have capacity in place to receive large orders. On the other hand, if you have the capacity in place and don't get the orders from large customers, you can go bankrupt, you can fail as a company. So how you pick the right amount of growth and the right amount of time with the risk that's required as a result of not having business absolutely in place at the time you take those risks is a very complex planning issue. We seem to do that pretty good. We didn't expand way before the need occurred, but we have to expand somewhat before the need occurs. Give an example. We were building a plant in anticipation of large growth, and when the business didn't occur, we stopped building the plant. But we continued uh, putting the pilings in and preparing for the plant growth so that when the business did come in, it didn't take us that long to finish the plant. You have to do this kind of strategizing, risk-taking, studying, planning, forecasting, that combination to achieve this kind of growth.
Can you give us an idea how long it took for you to reach a point where you felt more comfortable now you were on the right track to continue to that $1 billion annual rate?
Well, when we won our second large customer, getting the first large customer was a major task for the company, because the problem that occurs with a customer, they think you're too small to get the business, and unless you get the business, you're always too small. So how do you get to the point where you're large enough for a large customer to satisfy their planning for you as a major source? How do they trust you to be able to do the business? When the second customer came along, we already had the ability to show that we can handle large customers, and then we acquired a second large customer. Once we acquired the second large customer, it was easy to get the third, the fourth, and subsequently many more since then.
If you can you tell somebody else, whatever the size of their company is, if they got in trouble, what would you suggest that they think about?
Before they get in trouble, they have to think about what would happen if the largest customer stopped giving them orders.
So you're saying if they haven't planned for that, they're in trouble?
Generally, yes, because you can't move on a dime. Like, for example, you have to work with your suppliers. They have to be aware of what you're doing, because once you tell your supplier we need more parts for you to deliver us, and then stop them cold, you may lose them forever. So we have to work with suppliers as well. It's not just your own staff. You have to work with your supply chain.
All right. We didn't specifically talk about the product or service, but that might give us a better flair what you were up against. So could you give us an idea of what that was and what the competition was? That they probably were really happy when they saw this happening, because I'm sure the market knew what was going on.
Well, I don't think we had problem with our competitors, because they were equally getting downsized
Same one?
similarly. Yeah. I mean, the customer we were dealing with had the largest share of the market. So when they started, or when they stopped growing, all suppliers were getting in trouble. We were the largest supplier to them, but even the second sources were being downsized. I don't think anybody was happy that this was happening. It wasn't an increased opportunity for them, because they may be even losing more share. They had to do what we did, which is work on other customers' potentials of getting more business. If they didn't do that diligently, they would lose share.
Phil, I think there was a level of difficulty because you were doing printed circuit assemblies and all your products were customized. That must create more difficulty than if you're building a bunch of products, you just build less.
Actually, that question you just asked opens up a conversation of many things. This is the business we were in, is a business of building customized parts in large volume, specialized parts that fit in special applications. They're not standard products. If customer A does not use the parts we make for them, we can't supply them to customer B. The raw material of what we use to make the parts can clearly be used for customer B, but not the parts. So you have to plan this operation accordingly. The engineering department we had to really fit in hand in glove with the customer's engineering department. It's part of their organization in a sense. So when we design parts and build parts, was part of a team with the customer. And when they downsized their team, of course, we had to downsize our team, except we were able to deploy our team to another customer.
Phil, an interesting point. You, if I said to you, what were the best moves you made, beside being prepared by your strategy planning? What would you say some of the best moves were? Not panicking. I like to put words in your mouth.
Yeah, well, not panicking is a very important move, because if you panic, you do the wrong things. For example, you have a staff in place. When things go negative, most companies think about downsizing. If instead you think about growth during that downsizing phase with key people, you may be able to capture more market share. So instead of actually just blatantly cutting costs, we lowered costs according to the needs. Like, for example, we didn't decrease the marketing organization. In fact, we increased the marketing organization during the negative periods to increase the activity to get more customers. That, I think, is key.
Phil, if some people are watching it, they may have an attitude, well, you were big enough, you could have overcome that. But you also work with a lot of small companies, like you said, on the way to that one. So, what would you give advice for a small company?
It's almost a similar kind of advice. Small companies have more of a need to work on the marketing growth aspect than large companies, because large companies already have the presence. They're known by almost all customers and suppliers. Small companies are hardly known. Getting to be known is more important. I believe the marketing effort for small companies is key. In addition to having a novel, product or approach or a service, you need to have a presence.
You told me once that you had two choices. One choice you could identify what the dent is and what you have to recover, and you did work on how do you fill that dent. And the other one is just get the heck out of the facility, the people, and you never recover. So I learned that lesson from you in another conversation. Now let me ask you, what are you doing now? Give us an idea, because that was quite a thing. I know from history it was time to move on, to leave the company. But you seem like you're really enjoying yourself. So tell us what you're doing now.
Well, my career, I had a lot of work working with startups, turnaround companies. Actually, it all led to the final success of Enflex. But most of my career was with smaller companies, startups, and turnarounds, which I enjoy more than even the large company. The reason why I stayed with Enflex, it got to be a big success. It grew over 30% a year, from around $600,000 of revenue to over $800 million when I retired as CEO. But the more interest occurred during the growth phase rather than the governance phase. To me, governance is the necessity of a large company, but growth comes before governance. So I enjoy working with smaller companies.
Now, Phil, I'm going to put you on the spot. I really want to have another interview with you to see if you can tell us, with startup plus a multi-$100 million public company, if there's some similar situations to work on. And so I'll invite you back. Is there anything you would like to add before we wrap this up?
Well, I already said it. I think the risk taking and contingency planning are the two major prongs, I think, of strategy for a company. That is, you need to take a risk. You have to do something different than what you're doing now to grow. Growth comes as a result of change. So the idea of change means risk taking. So that's a very key part of this whole process of growth. Along with that, the risk taking is contingency planning, because the risk you're taking may be wrong. So I think those are the two prongs. One is risk taking to invoke change, and the other one is if the change isn't working right for you, what do you do? That dual planning is a necessity for companies, large and small.
Now, I've heard one of your seminars that not taking a risk is a risk. So maybe we could end it at that. Phil, I want to thank you very much for taking your time. This concludes our conversation for today. Please look forward to more interviews with Phil and other icons in the industry. Go to richarddadamo.com. Also, you can find my latest book on amazon.com, The Anatomy of a Growing Company. Thanks so much for your time. See you next time.